Hello and welcome back to Planet Critical, the podcast for a world in crisis. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and your host. Last week, I interviewed Phoebe Bernard. Phoebe's a climate scientist who has dedicated her life to many different areas of the climate crisis, including biology, women's leadership, politics, economy, all these kinds of things and how they interplay all around the world. And she's also the co-founder of the Stable Planet Alliance, which is a group dedicated to investigating overpopulation and hyperconsumption. And that interplay is very, very important. You cannot talk about population without talking about consumption, Phoebe says. And so we had a really big conversation about those things. And it was at times deeply uncomfortable. I recognized that we have not discussed population on the show before. It is a divisive topic because people are rightly concerned that when discussing population reduction, conversations will become more veer into eugenics territory, racist territory, and rightly so, because the West certainly has a very recent history of eugenics couched in racism, sterilizing mentally ill people in the 50s, sterilizing Black people in the United States as well in the 50s and 60s. So any talk about population is rightly extremely difficult to stomach. And I was grateful with Phoebe that she was willing to answer all of my questions on it. I suppose the thing that I want to talk about in this bonus episode is how Phoebe framed the population question as a problem of intergenerational rights. So rather than digging into the individual question of, morally or ethically or existentially, do we have a right to have children? That's probably not particularly interesting a question. Having children is something that people have been doing for millennia, hundreds of millennia. Species self-propagating is not only the realm of humans, it's the realm of every single living thing on this planet. So whether or not we have an individual right to isn't that interesting a question. Whether or not we have a right to leave behind a healthy environment for future unborn children is perhaps a far more interesting question. Whether we have the right, whether we have the responsibility. And so, who do we choose to protect in that scenario? The unborn, inevitable children of the future who deserve a healthy environment and a healthy planet, versus our individual unborn children, about whom we don't tend to talk about the healthy environment, but rather more the environment of the individual as a territory for their own self-propagation, I suppose. And I guess when you frame it like that in terms of intergenerational rights, you are essentially talking about the right of the individual versus the right of the collective. If we could take away the politics of and the fears around eugenics and racism and all of these things, which are such a vital part of the conversation. If you could take that away just for a moment and have a kind of metaphysical, moral conversation around children, it is the right of the singular person to have a child versus the right of future inevitable unborn children to a healthy world. It is the right of the collective versus the individual. And yet, of course, you cannot delete these fundamentally political parts of this conversation in order to try and have an easier one. We have to talk about our history of eugenics. We have to talk about racism. We have to talk about the inequality of resources in the global south and the global north, and therefore that one person born in the global north is going to have a worse planetary impact than, I don't know, more born in the global south. We would be mistaken to make this a purely moral conversation or purely moral debate. It's kind of letting ourselves off the hook because ultimately there really is no right or wrong empirically when it comes to morals. That's individual's choice. And this is a conversation around individual's choice, I suppose. I often think that perhaps individuality and our focus on individuality is yet another symptom of capitalism. And so, how do we look at policies through a different kind of filter, through a different sort of paradigm? What do pro natalist arguments or anti natalist arguments look like out with the frame of capitalism. Capitalism gets us stuck in this timeline of immediacy, and population reduction and the discussion of population reduction, perhaps the necessity of population reduction, demands a longer term vision whereby not only do we think of the collective, but we try to envision the past, present, and future as existing at the same time, as every person who has existed and their concerns and what they went through, being as important as the concerns and well-being of people today, as important as the concerns and well-being of the inevitable unborn people who will exist in the future. How do we create a world that protects all of those people, protects the legacy of the past, protects the future, and protects those who exist here today? You have to throw out the script of individualism when trying to reframe the paradigm of humanity as a kind of eventual and everlasting collective. We speak a lot about ecosystems on this podcast, the ecosystems of ecosystems of biology, the ecosystems of politics, of power. Perhaps we also need to think about the ecosystem of time. Time is still perceived as this linear progression, this inevitable march into the unknown, past, present, future, as if they can somehow exist out with each other, and yet we depend on them in order to identify the other. Lots of cognitive dissonance going on. Perhaps to think about an ecosystem of time would be to understand that the future is here with us now in just the exact same way as the past is always with us. And how we choose to interact with our past mistakes and legacies directly impacts the creation of our future. And our future is constantly changing, it is not fixed. And yet, the flashes of potential in our future also directly impact and change our present. I suppose what I like about such a very fluid and nuanced vision is that it's quite hard for power to pin down any one part of it and exert force. The diversity of ecosystems makes them more resilient. We need diversity in order to be resilient. The diversity of everything that we could be equally makes us resilient. Diversity of the future, how it then interplays with the present, makes us resilient. And it makes it difficult for power to exert its force. Becoming rigidly caught in any one paradigm, in any one system, in any one definition of citizenship, or modernity, or human being, or rights even, makes it easy for power to exert itself because the target has stopped moving, it is solidified, it has become a thing, and then you can start to deconstruct a thing essentially, or annihilate a thing. This is very metaphysical, everybody. I'm recovering from COVID. Please bear with me. And yet, to be fluid, to be nuanced, to be flexible, to be willing to change constantly makes it very, very difficult for power to pin down. So perhaps rather than viewing this time as a linear construct, but also population as a binary weaponized debate, perhaps we need to see it as a weapon in our arsenal of how to deal with the climate crisis and consumption and resources and inequality, and use our willingness to act as a collective, even by perhaps reducing our own individual rights to have children right now. See that as an incredible weapon, just that willingness to work together, that power, the powerful power, will find very, very difficult to exert a force on, and would have to exert a lot of force in order to start unpinning those collective tissues and recreate us as individuals within a capitalist economy, and within the paradigm of only thinking of ourselves. So much value in what everybody who comes on the show has to say. There's so much value in how willing they are to speak to the nuances of these problems. Grappling with and accepting these nuances are part of the way that we are going to find a way through, I think. And what's sort of so amazing about the population problem and the idea of voluntary and coercive policies is that if you can encourage a people, a community to do something together, that will not be seen as a reduction in one sort of individual autonomy. It will be seen as an increase in one's individual capacity in as a part of the collective. If one person has less children, it's not going to do much together. Millions together having less children is going to have a huge impact. That's yet another way of reframing this. I would be remiss to say that Phoebe, of course, discusses education and women's leadership throughout the episode and the importance of investing in women as a way of not only creating a better world, but also of dealing with these exact problems of reproduction and envisioning sort of different kinds of policies. So if you haven't listened to the episode, I would highly suggest you go and do that. That's enough from me today. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you all enjoyed it. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. If you're new here, remember to subscribe to Planet Critical and turn on the little notifications bell. And if you're a long-time listener and enjoying the show, you can support Planet Critical on the Patreon page or at planetcritical.com. A huge thank you to everyone who is supporting the podcast. None of this work would be possible without you all. It is such a pleasure to see a Planet Critical community continue to grow month in, month out around these topics. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for watching. I hope this was valuable to you, and I will see you next week.